Thank you. I broadly find myself in a novel position of no longer thinking, oh gosh, the Home Office has said something that is, as Brandon put it, the bad cop, and now we have to play the good cop. I think actually we're in the really happy position that this is a pretty, we're already in a much more coherent place on tech policy than we have been across all the different departments that have interest in it. And I'm not just saying that because Brandon and I sort of share the online harms white paper and he's the more senior person. I think what I would say, and almost all of this does back up a lot of what Brandon has just said. I think there was this early view of the web that essentially if everyone was allowed to say whatever they wanted online and tech companies were allowed to sort of follow the philosophies they initially said that they would, then sort of fundamental, liberal, nice, friendly values would win out, and we wouldn't see those sort of hateful opinions expressed. We'd see a web that was somehow sort of a perfect, naive version of humanity. And of course, it turns out that that's not true. It turns out that the web is clearly a place where now I think there is very broad public consent that whether it is anti-vaccination content, whether it is some of the content that people, the young girls in particular, see around eating disorders on Instagram in particular, or whether it is at the other end with the extremism and child sex exploitation, there is clearly public consent that something needs to be done to address a sector that has developed in a profoundly unregulated way and now agrees with both politicians and the public that regulation is in their interests as well. The question is, what do we do with it? And I think there are two starting points. The first is, it is not right that the people who run Google or Facebook decide what it is that should be effectively legal online. That has to be, it's always been a political decision or a democratic decision around what is legal offline, and it should continue to be the case around what's legal online. So I think we're having this conversation in the right place. We need to have it in a more sophisticated way than we had done in the past. But all of that, I say, as someone who is profoundly optimistic about technology. Where we talk about AI, I think we should start from the place that it will create more jobs than it will destroy, if you want to think of it in those very black and white terms, just as we saw in the previous industrial revolution. And I think we should, I would start at it from, for instance, we've had some very controversial conversations around the use of AI and surveillance cameras. Now that is very much a Home Office purview rather than a DCMS one, but I would start off by saying, from a purely personal view, it is completely legal for an individual police officer to be looking at footage from surveillance cameras. It is surely in all of our interests for a more efficient automated assistant to help that police officer find people that we want to track down and talk to. And that the fact that there are, in the very first instance, always going to be big difficulties around perfecting that system doesn't mean we should ever use that as an excuse for not pursuing a technology solution. And similarly, I think we shouldn't think that the end-to-end encryption that Brandon rightly raises alarms about is the perfect end state for what encryption in the modern world looks like. The solution to that technology challenge will come from technology. It will come from working with those big companies in exactly the way that Brandon described. So I think we should be optimistic about what that relationship can look like, but we should also start from the place that says we have to carry the stick that government has always carried and say, what can we do in the future that will allow us to stop the very worst in a way that does have some legislative oomph behind it, rather than something that has always relied on technology companies to agree with us that something must be done, but that they should set the terms for it. So I think it is the right time to be talking about a shifting relationship. A liberal democracy like Britain is our right place to be trying to set that tone, but we need to do it in such a way that it is obvious that ultimately government will not allow companies like Google or Facebook to be the final arbiters of what is acceptable in this country.